Hey everybody and welcome. Today's video is going to be all about how I took this tintype and turned it into this gown. My inspiration gown is clearly an 1840s one with the pleated and partially gathered bodice front and the tight sleeves, which are prime examples of the fashions of the 1840s. When I actually started working on making this though, I did not use a pattern for an 1840s dress. I actually used Truly Victorian's 1856 fan front bodice pattern, mainly because it was front opening, so I needed to do less to it to get it to look right than if I had used the Truly Victorian 1840s German style gown, because that is a back opening pattern and would have taken a lot of time and effort to adapt it. I flatlined the wool of this dress with a cotton sateen, and I opted to use the sateen because this wool is ever so slightly sheer, so I thought it would just look nicer to have that little bit of extra reflective, not even reflectiveness, but you know, that little extra sheen of the cotton sateen beneath the wool. I opted to baste my wool and flatlining together by hand. At the same time, I actually basted on all of my piping, because piping is a defining feature of 1840s dresses as well. And I cut what felt like miles of piping in multiple widths. I did 1¼ inch wide for all of the internal seams, and for the outer edge piping I cut that 2½ inches, and then for the extra wide piece that went down the center front, that was actually cut 4 inches wide. The front panel for the wool is cut a lot wider than the lining piece, so before I basted that to its interlining, I put the gathering stitches in to be able to shirr the shoulders. And once I had done that, then I partially basted the top of the shoulder, around the arm, and down the side seam. And the reason I did not do the center front basting yet is because I hadn't fit the darts at this point. So once I had the bodice assembled, except for along the front seams, I put it on with all of my undergarments and everything, and I fitted my darts. My method always and forever is to not even try to fit the darts in a mock-up. I just do it in the finished piece, because sometimes it will change, especially if you're using a different fabric for your mock-up. So that's why I opted to wait until I actually had everything together before I fit my darts. And once that was done, it was time to do all of those little tucks along the center, or along the front underneath the bust. And I tried a couple different methods before I finally hit on what was basically a divide and conquer method. My first attempts to just eyeball it didn't work. You can see me try a couple different ways. And then what I ended up doing was just dividing it in half, smushing it down, and then continuing to divide it, and then folding it over into the pleats, because I wanted to have 8 pleats or tucks on each side as the original had. So, and I tucked from the hem of the bodice up to the top of the darts, so that as the dart finished, the fabric released out from the pleats or tucks over my bust. Once I was happy with the overall look of them, I just nice and easily did a spaced back stitch to stitch all of them down right on through the interlining. Once I had sewn down all 16 tucks, which took a while, it was time to start working on piping and binding the edge of the bodice. As I mentioned earlier, I cut this bias a little wider. What I did was, instead of folding it just in half and lining it up with the edge, I offset the fold so that I had a 1/2 inch seam allowance on one side and a little over an inch on the other side. and that way I could line the shorter seam allowance side up to the edge of the bodice, and then I didn't have to trim anything away once I turned it in to then whip stitch it down and finish the piping and binding in one go. The one thing I did use from the 1845 Truly Victorian pattern was the sleeves, and that is because 1840s have that very distinct straight narrow sleeve, whereas the 1856 pattern had a different style, early pagoda almost look to it. And that was actually the last part of the construction for this dress that I filmed. Oops. Yeah, that's one of the downsides of working on stuff, 2 days before the event and hitting the time crunch at the end of this. So I'm just going to real quick go over what I did. For the sleeves, once they were sewn and the cuffs bound and piped, I just set them into the armhole, and then I also added a hook and eye at the cuff with a short opening, just to keep them a little tighter around the wrist, rather than have them be sewn all the way down and able to just fully slip on. And as you can see, I also just really quickly basted on some lace for the second time I wore this dress, because collars, and the collar as well, because they are very common for the period. It is just a wide lace that I tacked on, nothing fancy or special. To close this, I used metal hooks, and then I made thread bars, because all I had were hooks and the big loop eyelets, and those would have shown if I had used those. The skirt is super simple and basic. It's just 2.5 panels of my wool fabric that are pleated with an inverted box pleat at the front. The opening is on the side front. At the moment, it's only safety pinned because I just cannot find my big heavy-duty skirt hook and eyes anywhere. Once I do track those down, I will replace, or I should say, I will put in an actual closure on the skirt. To finish the hem, I actually just bound it with the same Petersham ribbon that I used for my waistband. It's 7/8 inch wide and this really pretty light gray color that I just pressed in half, and you can actually see just how sheer this fabric is that I used for this dress. There is one thing I'm going to do before I hang this dress up in my costuming closet after having worn it twice in 3 days, and that is I'm actually going to add a little tape loop to help support the front of the skirt, because despite this being a very fine wool, it's actually a pretty weighty dress and I don't want a lot of strain, because the skirt is only attached along the back of the waistline. It detaches at the side seams. That's where it's sewn, from side seam to side seam, and that is because the front scoops down, so I did not bother to baste it in the middle of the bodice because I didn't want it to hang weird when I was wearing it. So all I'm doing is I'm just taking a piece of, I believe this is 3/8 inch wide cotton tape that I got from Burnley and Trowbridge actually, and I'm just safety pinning it down to the waistband so that when I hang it, the weight of the front of the skirt is held up by this tape and not just hanging loose and pulling at where it attaches at the side seams. And that is the entire dress. I am incredibly happy with how it came out. The only further tweak I'm going to make to it is I want to run a couple, like a little invisible basting lines up the front on the outside of where the pleats go, just to help keep the fullness a little more centered. But otherwise, yeah, I'm really happy with it, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Victorian Photography Studio actually came out and did a pop-up shop nearby, So here's a little bonus tintype that my husband came and sat for with me. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like this and subscribe if you want to see more. And if you want to give me a little extra boost, check out the link to my Ko-fi down below. Thank you. See you again soon.